Hello and welcome back to my channel for another episode. Today we will be talking about cash flow and what that looks like in your financial plan. Cash flow and your budget are very similar but very different at the same time, and I think it is important that we know the difference between the two. So in this video we'll give examples of both, and I just put a video out about budgeting, so I'll sort of recap that first before going into the cash flow. But that's how we'll get things started. So just to recap the budget is the foundation of your financial plan. This is where you're going to be able to set intentions and look at how you're going to move forward. This is setting your intentions for the future and what you will do. So the purpose of this is to bring awareness to how you're spending. And I just want to reference that early so that you don't feel any condemnation or shame, or you don't have to feel bad about how you spend or money decisions that you've made in the past, because the budget isn't to condemn those things, but to reveal those things or make you aware of them so that you can do something different in the future. So many don't like to talk about the budget. It's like a cuss word to some people. However, it is the very thing that's going to allow for you to get very clear on what you have done and how you can do things differently in the future. So it's just really good to make things tangible. It'll give you all of that information by keeping it from just being stored in your head as a memory. Many times when we ask people how much money are you spending each month, if they don't budget, they think that they can actually keep that in their minds. And what I find is that that's not true at all. Many of us think that we spend much more conservative than we actually do when we look at the numbers. And we don't want to do that because your spending is a big piece of your financial plan. So we want to make sure that that's right. And the way that we can do that is just by having it on paper and having a tangible place that we can go and get that information. So once the budget is established, you've established what you're making by way of income, you've established what you're spending by way of your expenses. Now we turn the conversation to what's more so thought of as your cash flow. And this is basically the money coming in and what's going out, and specifically where is that money going. So many times when we work with our clients, the first thing that they say out of their mouths is, Rob, I'm making money. I know that I'm making money, but I'm not necessarily sure where that money is going. And that's because a lot of times they haven't done that budget and they don't know exactly where their cash flow is. So if the budget is the foundation of your financial plan, I like to say that your cash flow is the heartbeat. The cash flow is what allows for it to go, because the budget makes you aware. However, information isn't really good for you until you actually do something with it. So when we look at the cash flow, that's what we're looking to do. What can we do to make sure that we're optimizing what it is that we're earning and keeping as much money as we can possibly keep? So when we look at the cash flow, this is where we're going to be able to make adjustments to your spending. So you'll have a lot of different categories within the cash flow. For example, you can have your living expenses, you can have your insurance, your taxes, you can have your savings, 401k, HSA. All of these things are different buckets within your cash flow that when we can really dive in or zoom into those particular things, we'll be able to see if your spending is on par with what you think that it is that you're spending, as well as find different opportunities where you may be overspending. For example, your taxes. If you work a job, you have a 9-to-5, and we look at your tax situation or your pay stub and we see that you're over withholding on your pay stub, that would mean that you get a big refund at the end of the year. If you get a big refund, that means that you're letting the government hold your money throughout the year, and they're just giving you back what's owed to you at the end. So that's one adjustment that we can make, to withhold less money in your pay stub so that you get more money out of your checks and not a big refund at the end of the year. These cash flow conversations is what's going to make sure that you are keeping as much money in your pocket as possible. Another reason that it's important is because this is where it's going to make sure that it aligns with your values. When you really go through both of these things together, you can see clearly how you're spending. And if you say that, hey, I really want to leave a legacy for my family, hey, I really want to spend time with my family, or I want to give more, whatever that thing is, it's going to be clear if how you're spending is aligning with what you're actually saying your intentions are. So after going through that budget, after going through your cash flow, now we have some real decisions that have to be made. When your income is already accounted for, when your expenses are accounted for, that would mean that you have a number or a dollar amount that's left over. And this is where we can start mapping out some of those cash flow items so that we know what your goals are and how you're going to use that money to fund those goals. So let's say, for instance, your goal is to build an emergency fund, pay off debt, and purchase a home in the next 2 to 3 years. So working with a financial planner, or individually if you so choose, you would have to prioritize which of these 3 items or any other items do I need to start attacking first. And part of the conversation with you will be to look at what your debt is. What type of debt is it? Is it high interest? Is it something that you can get rid of right away? What is the balance? How much time do you have to pay it off? We kind of go through that process of figuring out what can we accomplish with the least amount of resistance, and what are the things that are going to take a little bit more time and effort, which we can get to a little bit later. So if those are your 3 goals, my recommendation, hypothetically, this isn't personalized advice at all. However, I would say let's build 3 to 6 times whatever your monthly expenses are so that we have that emergency fund. We don't want you to go into debt if something happens, and things do happen all the time. So if your car goes down, if you get laid off your job, whatever that thing is, we just need to be prepared for it so that when that thing happens, we have cash on hand to pay for it rather than having to use credit cards to pay for those things. So we'll build your emergency fund first. So we allocate whatever that disposable income amount was to your emergency fund, and therefore we know how much time it takes you to build that emergency fund and how much money you actually have to put towards that emergency fund. Number 2, once you've built your emergency fund, now we can turn your attention in your cash flow to knocking out some of your debt. So let's just say that you have a couple credit cards. The balances aren't very high, but you have very high interest rates on these credit cards. So I would advise what you were putting into your emergency fund. If it was $1,000, whatever that dollar amount is, you now take that $1,000, put it towards that credit card plus the minimum payment, and whatever that is, you go ahead and pay that off so that you increase your cash flow once it is paid off. Once the credit card is done, now we turn our attention to getting into some real savings. And savings can look a little bit different depending on what you're saving for. And that would be a part of the conversation that we won't dig into today. But essentially, these 3 goals have been knocked out because of the decision to, number 1, get your budget done, and number 2, allocate your cash flow, or figure out exactly where your cash flow is going so that you can hit these specific goals. So having these 2 parts of your financial plan done as the foundation is just going to allow for you to have peace in knowing that whether you say yes to something or no to something, you know the answer that you're giving is not going to be a detriment to your financial plan. So when your friend calls you for a vacation, you know what you can do and what you can't do without having to feel that shame or guiltiness about your spending. So I hope that this was helpful. If you guys have any other topics or video suggestions that you want for me to put out, feel free to drop it in the comments or reach out directly, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great day.